So, Venerable Hoksing Hai, brothers and sisters of Buddhism for Education of Cambodia, the Buddhist University satellite campus here under the tutelage of the Venerable V. Sovachaya, who is unfortunately not available today, but intends to participate in the next classes if possible. Just for brief introductions, I would like to introduce myself and then get into the classes, because I know you all have extremely busy schedules and I do not want to disrupt your day, or do not want to disrupt your day as little as possible. So I'm Philip Abbott from the George Mason University in Arlington, Virginia, the School for Conflict Analysis and Resolution. And just for a brief background, I came to Cambodia for the first time in 2015. I believe it was in December of 2015 with the professor at George Mason University, Professor Al Fuertes, who was giving a reflective class. He unfortunately got ill, so didn't make the trip, but that was the first time I met the Venerable Hoksing Hai and was introduced to Buddhism for Education of Cambodia's peace work. I subsequently took a trip to Cambodia on an internship that lasted just over about 2 months, I guess it was, maybe 6 months, 6 weeks to close to 2 months, where primarily we worked on the International Buddhist Conference, but I was afforded a great opportunity to observe at least four of the 5 peace activities that Buddhism for Education of Cambodia conducts on an annual basis. The only one that I was not afforded the opportunity to visit was the prisoner education or meditation classes that go on in the Bong prison. At that moment, I realized there was something special in Buddhism and its relationship to conflict resolution. And that is essentially the purpose of me being here today. I asked the Venerable Hoksing Hai if he would be interested in doing a collaborative research study of Buddhism for Education of Cambodia's peace work, and choosing the methodology participatory action research, which would incorporate a number of non-traditional approaches to research. I don't know if you need to translate that, or it's okay. We're capturing it. Yeah. So it's quite a challenge.
Okay, you talk. I will summarize some, but you finish.
Okay. So I know it's very difficult to be able to capture all of this information, and I will slow down my pace and my rhythm of speaking in order to capture it. The idea would be to film this and then translate it into Khmer, so subsequently you'll be able to review it. We could also do an additional class. I've organized 4 classes that will focus first on the doctoral dissertation proposal. And that's what the class today will present. Tomorrow, I'm hopeful we can do another class tomorrow, if that meets everybody's schedule, and that'll be on a non-traditional methodological approach to inquiry. Methods meaning an approach to find out information or knowledge about, in this case, Buddhism for Education peace work. And then the third class we have captured on video actually two of your pieceworks that took place last week and the week before, caring for the poor and aging. And we will use those videos to reflect and to put into place, it'll serve multiple purposes. First, it will allow us to reflect on the activity. Second, it will allow me to explain in detail some of the terminologies and the approaches to participatory action research. And then finally, it'll give us an opportunity to look at the questions, the 4 questions that we have developed, to look at it within that context and try to use this pilot as a way to act and to reflect on those questions, and then possibly make adjustments to the way, the efficacy of those peace programs that you're conducting. And finally, we will do a class on developing surveys and questionnaires as another form of data collection. So before I begin, the big question is, what is it, why are we here today together going through these classes? Well, I think it's important, instead of doing research on you and your peace activities, I think it's important for you to go through that process. So if you look, I've highlighted, italicized, with. Yeah. It's a very non-traditional approach to research. The research is done with you, not about you or on you. So we're a collective body. We're going to collaborate. I'm of the opinion that the research should be done on the people, by the people, and for the people. In this case, Buddhism for Education of Cambodia should have that knowledge. They should develop that knowledge, and they should be able to plan, act, observe, and reflect on all those processes in order to improve the way they're doing their peace activities. A traditional approach would be, I would come in here, do research on you, ask you questions on what your activities are about, go back, publish something, but it really hasn't benefited you. And so the purpose is to develop scholarly practitioners. You're Buddhist monks. You follow special values that are embodied in the Dhamma, the Buddhist teachings, which is very, very important for me to understand how that knowledge can help us resolve, in this case for Buddhism, it's suffering, but conflicts, friction, all the poisons that are surrounding greed, hatred or ill will, and delusion. How can we, as a collective body, through Buddhism for Education of Cambodia peace work, reverse that to its positive opposites, which would be, greed would be turned into generosity or dana. Ill will and hatred would be converted into compassion or loving kindness. And delusion would be, its opposite would be wisdom. And that's through being mindful, and that is captured in the Four Noble Truths and Eightfold Path. And so as we go further, I will go into a lot of terminology, and I don't expect, because of the language barrier and the difficulty of the subject, this takes many, many years to capture, but the most important thing is that we capture it on video. We are able to highlight it in a language that would be easy to review, in this case Khmer, and then we can go back and review it as we have. But the big thing is that you would have this. So some of the guiding books that I use to develop this, I've used several. I mean, this is only a portion because I can only bring so many. I mean, I have a hotel full of books, but I can only bring so many, maybe 30 or so. But there's maybe 70 of research books. So, and tomorrow's class will be primarily on this one by Hare and Anderson, which is participatory action research for the dissertation, the doctoral student. So those are some of the books which, when we're done, those will go into your library here in Cambodia. And so I'd like to maybe allow the Venerable Hoksing Hai, if he wants to interject at any time, to do say a few words perhaps of clarity, and then I'll go into the formal presentation, if you choose to. It was a lot. It was a lot. It was a lot.
Chia vô lấy chia. Vậy tao thì muối mình có nè nom pi cả nghe bọc quạt để chuột tới hay tờ máu quạt trong thưa ca sa chiêu từ lơ cái ca nghe bỏ giờ nướng bỏ cỏ nướng hay có các bạn đăng đây tha ca bẹ pòn đấy vì mình chỉ ca nghe sưu đặt tê vì làm bạ đai chèo xe ở đây đã quạt mình chạy lệ giới cứ quạt sao chiều rộp cho nam đai hay phơi của mình tách đấy phơi cho nên cái này về trong cái đó vì muốn quạt về cái này nong luôn hay gồm non quạt mò thứ ấy bảo vệ năng thứ ấy trong thời ca nghe mùa dương sao chiều mùa dương chỉ lệ lại chỉ krong nó cần dây cho ngày hàng đêm nó cần dây và đường này để quạt năng đó cho mấy miền bốn trên đó nhận doctoral dissertation research proposal nó lệ cái này khai sơ sơ sầm nào nạp bản đất đó nạp bản đất hay thì pi để tôi đừng ca sao chiều để tôi ca điệp chòm pen ca hay đó thì bảy nét cái dương dây pi pilot caring anh ấy cùng rong bao giờ caring for the poor and aging kia nó cứ cùng rongជួយcho người coi cha nó cái pilot nó chẳng vậy thôi chỉ cùng rong để dương tạ bong để quạt thử research cho hỏi nó ở gần miền có chỉ questionnaire có chỉ sum nu có chỉ cùng rong đâm bay promote tên anh đấy cái nòng pilot hay là nó cái nòng caring Merin quạt tiết nó cứ developing survey questionnaire cái trong dây tha cả tay gì đó cả step stone hay là cả đẹp trong sum nu thằng anh nó đã chịu năng riêng về về màn ngày nó nè okay let's just in brief
no that's very kind. I know the importance of that, having done Spanish translation for many years in Latin America. I mean, it's very valuable, and I'm very appreciative. I guess I just push one of these guys. So the argument for our study. So just leading into this, I know my presentation will have a lot of flaws and imperfections. It won't be a perfect presentation. I won't capture everything. I'm hopeful that I will get a large percentage that we can, as I said, place on a video, which is being recorded now, and translate and review. And I think that'll be sufficient for our purposes. But the argument, as I mentioned, for this is to collaboratively develop this doctoral dissertation research proposal with Theravada Buddhist monks And the case used will be Buddhism for Education of Cambodia, 5-piece works that they use on a daily basis. So the research proposal basically is an outline. There is no fixed way of developing a research proposal. It's up to the researchers, it's up to us. I have outlined one that I think, based on all the literature, the research literature, will help us frame the proposal and the activity. And it'll give us the best chance of keeping it very systematic. So when we do our research, we can do it with better precision and clarity. So basically the purpose of this proposal is divided into 2 parts. We'll have to explain to George Mason University School for Conflict Analysis and Resolution why we are doing this. So that'll be the first part. And then we'll have to explain how we intend to do this research. Okay? So this is what we'll follow briefly. And we'll break it into small pieces so it's maybe easier to capture and digest. I don't want anybody to have indigestion. Indigestion is when you eat too much and you get a stomach ache. We don't want that. So this will be the outline. So as you see, part 1 will be focused on the conceptual framework. That's an introduction with a statement of the problem. We'll capture the problem, okay? And then we'll develop a purpose, followed by the significance of the knowledge that we're looking for, and how that knowledge can advance further studies and further activities. And then we'll develop questions that will help us answer some of these questions. We'll look for the answers in these questions through our investigative work, through our research. We'll identify some of the limitations that are surrounding this dissertation, this research approach. And I have already reviewed much of the literature, and the 4 bodies of literature that we will follow will be socially engaged Buddhism. So I've read stacks of books on socially engaged Buddhism, from Sri Lanka to Myanmar, a little bit in Cambodia, Vietnam, and peace education, and finally participatory action research. And the purpose of the literature review will be to further gain knowledge of those bodies of work, but also help us identify gaps in those literatures that'll be purposeful as we do our own research. And then the second part will show how we intend to do our research. And that'll be encompassed in this methodological approach to inquiry. So we will use participatory action research as the method of gaining inquiry, gaining knowledge of Buddhism for Education of Cambodia. We will look at the site and population selection. So the site is here in Cambodia, in Bong. The population are those who participate in Buddhism for Education of Cambodia's peace work. Those 5 peace works or peace activities. We will look at the role that I play. You have 2 competing ideas. Typically in traditional research methodologies, as a researcher, you're doing it, you try to keep neutrality between the researcher and the subjects. I think it should be research with collective body. And so we're going on a non-traditional path instead of the traditional path. We will get a lot of pushback because it's not normal to do this, but academia is beginning to realize the importance of the knowledge that, in this case, Buddhist monks who work as practitioners in Bong, Cambodia, doing priest work through Buddhism for Education of Cambodia, have a voice, and that voice needs to be heard. And that voice needs to be heard through, hopefully, what we document after we complete our research. So they'll question us on some ethical considerations that all researchers have to bear in mind. Things of when you videotape, for example, an activity, does that person who you're videotaping recognize that his image is going on Facebook? And for some, that would be a very unethical thing to do without their permission. But we will develop, and we've already begun to explore this, and you do it just in your nature as Buddhist monks who hold the values of the Buddha in your hearts, in your minds, in your body. Take care of those old people, those poor people, those prisoners, those young, the young generation of youth. All of those people, all of the participants that you, as Buddhist monks working as practitioners through Buddhism for Education of Cambodia, hold a compassion or loving kindness in your hearts, in your minds, in your bodies, in your eightfold path: understanding, speech, right act, etc., which argue that you are taking the right ethical considerations when you conduct research, when you will be conducting research. And then we'll go into the data collection methods. That's the way you collect data and the analysis of that data and how it's valid, followed by a timeline, a conclusion, and references. That was a lot. So let's do one by one, and we'll just slowly get through this. Yeah, so that's the introduction. I think I've broken it. Do you want to say something? Yeah.
Just very short.
Okay. Mấy cần dây bừng lệ cái nạ ca sài chiêu ta chấm hiền nữa lo ta. Vừa được dương xe sập hơi xe ấy tới nó có trâu đợi ta chấm hiền nữa từng on nữa. Cùng rong có miền tôi tam mà chấm nói từng on đã quật về mấy nữa. Anh nói chăm dương mười thì tới hay có này cần bạn ơi ta mười miền overview nó trong như statement problem á kinh tế bị đườngបញ្ហាให้แต่មកយើងដាក់ topic purpose នេះ topic ធានបទមកសារៈសំខាន់នៃចំណេះដឹងការស្រាវជ្រាវ framework យ៉ាងនិយាយពីរឿងក្នុងការងារនោះយើងគួរធ្វើមិនហ្នឹងក្នុងរយៈកាលការងារអាណត្តិការងារនោះហើយឯទៀត social engage Buddhism peace ហ្នឹងនិយាយពីការងាររបស់យើងណាអូខេ
Yes, they are.
So having done a few Dhamma classes with the Venerable Hak Sing Hai, I recognize the challenges of conveying those very important messages in a way that resonates with the person listening. I'm really getting worried, however. not because I see something in your faces that tells me that it's very difficult, but the cat out there has fallen asleep, and that's not a good sign when your students are already falling asleep. So I will try to add a little bit more color to my presentation. I understand that there'll be great editing in this that'll make it a little bit better when you review it later on. So anyways, so the statement of the problem, that's in the introduction. So we've developed a statement of the problem, and it really, what it tries to do is tries to cover those 3 points. This is just an outline on how you develop it and what things you should place in that opening introduction. So when the reader looks at this, when I stand in front of the committee at George Mason University and I have to present this, that it's convincing. So the first part is you want to lay out the ideal condition. And in this case, we're talking about peace and happiness. I think that's the objective of Buddhism for Education of Cambodia. When you look at the 5 activities that we capture within peace work, you can call it peace education, but it's peace work. Let's capture it in that context, because it varies, but you're delivering Dhamma talks, you're sharing the Buddha's message, and so there is an educational component to that. Every time you deliver food or essential items to the poor or aging, when you go into the prison at Bong prison and you do meditation to them, there's a educational component to all of that. And so the first part is where we try to capture that. That's the ideal condition that we're trying to convey to whoever's reading this proposal. And so we've done that, and we need to review that and continue collaboratively to develop that. And so we'll have to read through that and make sure it satisfies the body, the collective body, when we present it, that everybody in this body that we've created as a team of scholars doing participatory action research is comfortable with the ideal condition that we've labeled. The next part, so it's probably 3 pages. The next part, it covers the reality. So in that, we look at, to some degree, we're looking at what we've mentioned already, a little bit of the conditions that society has currently: greed, ill will and hatred, delusion. And so we build on those ideas within that next piece, the next part in the introduction, in the statement of the problem. And how Boutros Ghali, specifically here for Cambodia, through UNTAC, had a vision that by changing the structures, democracy, market economy, those structures would be, theoretically, peace and happiness. And so we build that in the second part. That's kind of the argument. The reality is, that is what we're working with. That's the condition that we're in. And then the final part is where we introduce Buddhism for Education of Cambodia as the way in order to achieve the ideal condition of peace and happiness. It may not be all-encompassing, but in your sphere of influence, in those 5 peace activities, you know, prisoner meditation, caring for the poor and aging, educating the young generation in morality, in the Buddha teaching Dhamma, and the sponsorship program. In those 5 cases, the ideal condition can be achieved through Buddhism education of Cambodia. So that is laid out in the statement of the problem, and that's like an introductory piece.
only three. There are only three.
Well, this is a guide. This is a guide. Some just limit it to one page, but this is a guide that I think is a very nice way of kind of, as you're reading this, I think it lays it out. You know, you see what you're thinking is the ideal condition, what reality is, and how this can influence change. And that's what we're looking at. Okay?
How settlement problem ហ្នឹងគឺចង់និយាយថាអានេះយើងធ្វើអីមួយវាតែងបង្ហាញពីកំណត់បញ្ហាបានណាដូចរួនឯងសេសាណាសេវាពី